This is Mr. Eugene, and today we're talking about something that sits quietly in the back of every mature man's mind, a specific kind of awareness that only comes with time, with loss, with enough lived experience to finally see clearly what was invisible when you needed it most. It's the knowledge that arrives too late. Every man over 50 carries a version of this, a collection of things he now understands about life, about himself, about relationships, about money, about what actually matters, that would have changed everything if someone had handed it to him at 30, or 25, or even 35. Nobody handed it to him. He had to earn it, through failed relationships, through financial mistakes that cost years of recovery, through decades of people-pleasing that produced exhaustion instead of connection, through the slow, painful realization that the life he was building wasn't entirely his own. That knowledge, earned at great cost, is what this conversation is about today. Not as regret, not as a catalog of what went wrong, but as genuine wisdom, the kind that only comes from having actually lived through something rather than having read about it or been warned about it abstractly by someone whose warnings felt irrelevant at the time. Because here's what's true about wisdom that most people don't acknowledge honestly. You cannot fully receive it before you're ready for it. A 30-year-old man can be told everything we're going to discuss today. He can nod along, he can agree intellectually, and he will still go out and learn most of it the hard way anyway, because the understanding that lives in your chest rather than just in your head only comes from experience, not instruction. But there's still value in articulating it clearly. For the men in this audience who are living these truths right now and may not yet have found language for them, and for the younger men watching who might, just might, absorb something that saves them a decade of unnecessary pain. So here is what men over 50 know that nobody told them at 30. The first thing is this: what other people think of you is genuinely none of your business, and not in the casual, dismissive way that phrase gets thrown around, in a deep, structural way that changes how you make every major decision. At 30, most men are operating almost entirely on external feedback. They're choosing careers based on what sounds impressive, choosing partners partly based on how the relationship looks from outside, making financial decisions with one eye on what their peer group is doing, measuring success by standards they absorbed from culture, from their parents, from advertising, from the vague collective pressure of social expectation. They're not building their life, they're performing it, for an audience that is largely indifferent to their actual well-being and will not be present for the consequences of the decisions being made to impress them. By 50, most men have watched this performance produce results, and the results are instructive. The career chosen for prestige rather than genuine fit has become a prison. The lifestyle maintained to signal success has required financial sacrifices that created real stress. The relationship entered partly because she looked right from the outside has run its course, leaving behind division of assets, shared custody schedules, and the particular exhaustion of having been someone else's idea of a good husband rather than your own idea of a complete man. What men over 50 understand from having lived this is that approval is not a foundation. It's weather. It changes constantly, it responds to conditions you don't control, and you cannot build anything permanent on top of it. The only foundation that holds is internal. Your own values, clearly understood. Your own standards, honestly applied. Your own definition of what a life well lived actually looks like, independent of what anyone else thinks it should look like. The man who stops seeking approval doesn't become cold or indifferent to others. He becomes free. And freedom, real freedom, the kind that comes from not needing anyone's validation to feel secure in who you are, is something most men don't fully experience until their 50s at the earliest. If someone had told that 30-year-old man clearly, the opinions of people who don't have to live your life have no claim on the decisions you make about it, and meant it with the weight of someone who had actually lived that truth, it might have changed everything. It might have saved him a decade of building someone else's version of his life instead of his own. The second thing men over 50 know is that emotional availability is not weakness. Emotional suppression is. This runs directly counter to what most men of this generation were taught. They were taught, in ways both explicit and implied, that a man's emotional life was something to be managed privately, kept under control, never displayed in ways that might make others uncomfortable or that might suggest vulnerability. The result of that teaching, lived out across decades, is a generation of men who are extraordinarily capable in external domains and completely underdeveloped in their relationship with their own interior experience. Men who can solve complex professional problems, manage significant responsibility, navigate high-stakes situations with calm and competence, and simultaneously have no meaningful language for what they feel or what they need from the people closest to them. And that emotional suppression, which felt like strength at 30, reveals itself clearly at 50 as one of the most costly things a man can do. Here's what the suppression costs. It costs intimacy. Not just physical intimacy, though it costs that too. The deeper intimacy of being genuinely known by someone, of having a person in your life who understands what you actually carry rather than just what you produce. That kind of intimacy requires that you be able to express something true about your interior experience. And if you've spent 30 years treating your interior experience as something to be suppressed rather than shared, you've made genuine intimacy structurally impossible. It costs health. The research on this is consistent and serious. Men who chronically suppress emotional experience carry that suppression in their bodies. Elevated stress responses, higher rates of certain health conditions. The physiological cost of maintaining the performance of being fine when you're not fine accumulates over years and decades. It costs relationships, not just romantic relationships, friendships, relationships with children. Any relationship that could have genuine depth if you were capable of genuine openness, but that remains surface level because emotional accessibility was never developed. Men over 50 who have started doing the work of emotional development, who have started learning the language of their own interior experience however late, consistently report the same thing, that the relationships they have in their 50s feel more real, more nourishing, and more genuinely sustaining than anything they experienced in the decades when emotional suppression was in full operation. That accessibility, that willingness to actually be known rather than just admired or relied upon, is not weakness. It's the only thing that produces real connection. And real connection, it turns out, is one of the things that actually matters most to a man's quality of life, regardless of how little he prioritized it at 30. The third thing men over 50 know is that money is a tool, not a scoreboard. And confusing these two things is one of the most expensive mistakes a man can make. At 30, most men have an unconscious relationship with money that is primarily competitive and performative. Money is how you measure where you stand, how you signal value to potential partners, how you demonstrate to your peer group that you're doing well. The car, the house, the restaurants, the vacations, all of these function as evidence in an argument nobody explicitly agreed to have, but everyone is participating in. And because money is functioning as a scoreboard, the accumulation of it becomes its own goal rather than a means towards something else. Men spend decades earning significant incomes while simultaneously carrying significant debt, maintaining lifestyle overhead that consumes the earnings almost as fast as they arrive, and arriving at 50% with the realization that despite years of hard work and reasonable success, they have far less actual financial security than they should, because the money was going out as fast as it was coming in, performing success rather than building it. What men over 50 understand about money that they didn't understand at 30 is that security is the product of the gap between what you earn and what you spend, not the size of what you earn. That the man earning $80,000 a year and spending $65,000 is building something real. The man earning $150,000 and spending $145,000 is building nothing except the appearance of success, which is a fundamentally different and far less valuable thing. They understand that assets and income-producing resources are what actually create freedom, not consumption, not lifestyle display. The investment account compounding quietly, the debt eliminated aggressively. The income streams that don't require your direct time in exchange for every dollar they produce. These are the things that eventually buy back the only resource that money cannot create more of, which is time. And they understand that the financial decisions made in your 30s to impress people, to maintain appearances, to signal status to a peer group that is largely indifferent to your actual financial reality, are the decisions that cost the most in the long run. Not because the spending itself was catastrophic, but because of what that money would have become if it had been directed toward building security rather than performing success. The fourth thing men over 50 know is that the quality of your closest relationships determines the quality of your life more than almost anything else. This sounds obvious, but there's a version of understanding it intellectually and a version of having genuinely felt its truth through experience, and they are completely different things. At 30, most men deprioritize relationships in favor of building, career building, financial building, achievement building, Relationships get whatever time and energy is left over after the primary work of building is done, which is often very little. This feels reasonable at 30 because the building feels urgent and the relational cost of deprioritizing connection doesn't show up immediately. The friendships that atrophy slowly don't disappear overnight. The distance that develops in a marriage from years of emotional unavailability doesn't produce crisis right away. The relationship with children that stays surface level, because you are always working, doesn't feel like a wound until they're adults, and the closeness that should have been there simply isn't. By 50, the relational accounting comes due. The men who built impressively but built alone arrive at this stage of life with external markers of success and a profound interior loneliness that nothing they own or have achieved can address. The friendships are thin or absent. The marriage is functional at best, hollow at worst. The children are polite but not genuinely close. And the men who built somewhat less impressively but stayed genuinely connected, who prioritized presence over production, who maintained real friendships and showed up for people they loved with actual availability rather than just financial provision, those men arrive at 50 with something that cannot be purchased or achieved. A life that feels genuinely inhabited rather than just administered. What men over 50 know is that the relationships are the life, not the backdrop to the life, not the support structure for the work, the actual substance of a human existence. And everything prioritized above them in the years when there was still time to choose differently is what you trade for whatever you get instead, which is rarely as valuable as what you traded. The fifth thing men over 50 know is that peace is not something that happens to you. It's something you build deliberately. At 30, most men assume that peace will arise as a byproduct of success. When the career is stable, when the finances are secure, when the relationship is settled, when the children are raised, then things will calm down and there will be space for peace. This assumption is wrong, and the men who lived by it arrive at 50 having accomplished much of what they intended to accomplish and still finding themselves without the peace they expected those accomplishments to produce. Because peace is not a condition that external circumstances create. It's an internal practice, a discipline, something built through consistent choices about what you allow into your mental space, what you engage with and what you disengage from, what you hold on to and what you release. The man who has never developed this practice doesn't find peace when his circumstances finally align. He brings his restlessness into every favorable circumstance and makes it inadequate. He can never fully inhabit the good moments because there's always something on the horizon that needs to be managed or achieved before peace will be permissible. Men over 50 who have found genuine peace almost universally describe arriving at it through deliberate practice rather than favorable circumstances. Through learning to disengage from what doesn't serve them, through protecting their mental space from inputs that create unnecessary disturbance, through developing the capacity to be fully present in whatever is actually happening rather than perpetually oriented toward what's coming next. This practice, developed seriously, changes a man's entire experience of his daily life. The same circumstances that felt insufficient and restless before feel genuinely adequate and even deeply good once the capacity for presence has been built. Nobody told that 30-year-old man that peace was something he needed to build rather than something he could earn. Nobody told him that the relentless forward orientation, always toward the next thing, would cost him full presence in every moment he was actually living. Nobody told him that the capacity to simply be, without an agenda or an achievement in process, was itself one of the most valuable things a man could develop. He had to arrive at 50 to understand it, often after years of chasing a horizon that kept receding. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in any of what's been described here, you're already further along than you know. The recognition itself is the beginning of something. The awareness that the knowing which comes with age has genuine value, that the hard-won clarity you carry is not something to be embarrassed about, but something to build from and offer outward. You can't go back and be 30 knowing what you know now, but you can be 50, 60, 70 knowing it, and you can make every decision from this point forward from that clarity rather than from the assumptions that cost you so much before you arrived here. That is not a consolation prize. That is an extraordinary advantage if you choose to use it. If this resonates with you, share it with a man in your life who needs to hear it. Like this video if it gave you something real. And subscribe to this channel because this is the kind of conversation we have here. Honest, grounded, and built for men who are serious about the second half of their lives.